It's Fill Your Plate Now, where every bite brings you closer to the farm gate and further from what's unhealthy. Now here's your hosts, Julie and Tammy, helping you live well by filling your plate well.
Well, today our episode is on something a lot of people don't talk about, but more people should. It's on gut health.
I think this is going to be a great topic for us.
It is. And did you know that over 40% of the American population has some kind of gastrointestinal distress or some kind of intolerance?
I believe that statistic because I've got some family members dealing with this. So that's another reason why I'm very excited about this segment.
Yeah, and when I was researching it, it said even when they go to their doctors, unless the doctor brings it up, they very rarely mention it. It's just something they're embarrassed about and don't want to talk about. But today we're going to talk about it, and we have an expert in the field to help us with this topic and some of the problems and solutions that go with gut health. Today we have Amanda Sauceda. She's a registered dietitian and has a Master of Science in Dietetics, and she specializes in gut health and mindfulness because the two really do go together, she said. She's been quoted in a number of national media outlets such as Parade Magazine, Women's Health, and Shape. She's a graduate of Cal State University in Long Beach, where she currently serves as a lecturer on nutrition for the undergraduates there. And Amanda, welcome to our show today. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this talk. I'm excited. Gut health has always been a passion of mine.
Well, and that leads into my very first question. How did you first get involved with this area?
I actually love that you mentioned those statistics at the beginning because that was kind of my entrance to it. I did not enter into the field of nutrition expecting to go into gut health, but I started to have like some digestive issues, and I had family members, like you said, the more you talk about it, and bring up a conversation that is maybe a little bit of a taboo conversation, the more you start to realize that other people have similar complaints or similar concerns or questions. Is this normal or is this not normal? Because bathroom habits, how your stomach feels is not always dinner table talk. It might be for me and my family, but it isn't, it isn't for a lot of people. And so that is kind of how I started to get into gut health and really realized how individual the nature of our gut is. It's very much like a fingerprint. And I'm sure we'll talk about this, but really your gut friendly is like what gut friendly means to you is very unique. And there's no one cookie cutter, which we all know. There's no one cookie cutter approach to eating. And that same philosophy extends to your gut.
So, Amanda, I kind of have a two-part question here.
Yeah.
So what is good gut health? And then, what are the symptoms or what should we be recognizing if we're kind of suspicious something's going on with our gut?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a lot of the times when we think good gut health, in my mind, it's almost like just it's happening in the background. It's almost like not super present. It's usually when your gut health is not feeling good that you start to think about it. And so sometimes it might be easier for people to recognize what isn't good versus what's good. Because when things are good, you don't really think like, about your digestion or about maybe pooping or things like that. So I think when it comes to some things to think about like, maybe some yellow flags or some red flags to watch out for, I think anytime like you have these changes in bowel habits, and this might be a good segue, a good little minor segue to talk about like what's normal. And everyone has a different version of normal when they're going to the bathroom, but a good rule of thumb that I think is something to follow is, you don't want to have more than 3 bowel movements in one day, and maybe go more than 3 days without having one. So that already off the bat kind of gives at least people an idea of what to expect, I guess what to expect. I always think of going to the bathroom is like taking out the trash. You don't want the trash to be building up because it is waste. It's that final step of digestion. And so going normally often is an ideal situation. But the other two things to think about that can really extend to a lot of other digestive symptoms. Anytime you have symptoms that are painful or persistent. So painful and persistent are two things to watch out for, whether that looks at your maybe heartburn, or maybe that is looking at bloating or gassiness. Those are the two that you want to think, like, is it happening more often than not? Is it happening, after every time I eat? And does it have a lot of pain? Do I experience a lot of pain when these symptoms come around? Because to be honest, everyone's going to have some bloating time to time. Everyone's going to get a little gassy time to time. And that is not an automatic sign of bad gut health. It's really that persistence, the pain, like when it starts to interrupt quality of life, that's when you want to dig a little bit deeper.
That's a good point.
Very.
Quality of life.
Yeah, and very interesting. And, as you're going through all this, I'm thinking, I have a number of relatives and friends that have various issues and gut problems. So just knowing that, I'm wondering how commonly do you see these issues? I mean, do you see them relatively frequently? And what are the most common gut issues that you see?
Yeah, so I will say the more you start talking about it, the more you start to realize quite how common it is, because we can all um like I said, we've all experienced bloating, we've all experienced low gas, and we can all relate in some way or another. But I will say it's fairly common, particularly irritable bowel syndrome. So IBS being that one that is especially common, and that can present more as people being more prone to constipation, or that could present being more diarrhea prominent. And in some cases, people alternate between constipation and diarrhea. So that's why I think that looking at changes in bowel habits is a really good indicator of maybe something might be going on, and something worth talking to your doctor about, because you don't want to be constipated all the time. That's not normal. Or, having to urgency and running to the bathroom. That's not an ideal situation either. But I would say IBS is really the most common thing that I've seen.
Interesting. So just a change in what your normal routine is and seeing that over time.
Yeah. And your gut loves a routine, and we could talk about that too. I always say that, like, your gut loves consistency.
And I love your transparency in all of this, Amanda. One of the things, not to diminish the importance of this, but I'm just struck, one of my little nephews, one of his favorite childhood books was Everybody Poops. And so
Oh, I've seen that book. It's so cute.
Oh, it is. It really is cute. But in looking at some of your writings and stuff, you talk about mind and gut health. It's this combination of thinking. I mean, talk about that. I'm just very curious.
Yeah. There's like, I'm like, okay, which route do I want to go down? We all know, even if we aren't aware, that there is a mind-gut connection. And an example I always give is, have you ever felt butterflies in your stomach when you're nervous? Or
Yes.
have you ever felt, right? Have you ever felt butterflies when you're excited about something, or that fluttering sensation you get in the stomach? That is a sign of your mind-gut connection at work. And I think that's a really easy way for people to relate to that, right? How we feel mentally can impact our gut physically, and vice versa. And they talk to each other. Your mind and your gut are like best friends. They're always on the phone talking to each other and relaying messages. And what's really fascinating is there's actually more messages being relayed from the body up to their brain than there is from the brain down to the body. So
wow,
it's fascinating. It really is fascinating to see how strong this connection is. And even though I talk about this, and I think this is where mindfulness can come in, is like bringing awareness to how we're feeling. And even though I talk about this quite a bit, I still get surprised every once in a while, like, oh yeah, that it really is a thing. Like, how I actually feel really does impact. And one example I always think back of is, there was this one time where I was kind of going through, there was like a lot of stressors going on, but they were being managed, they were being handled, and I thought I was handling it fine. And I came home from work one day, and I pulled up to the curb, and all of a sudden I just felt like a pit in my stomach. And I was like, today wasn't a bad day, it wasn't particularly stressful, there's nothing crazy going on. But I think when just coming up to the house and realizing like, oh, these concerns that I have are still like going on. They haven't been solved yet. It kind of just hit me. And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me of, again, how strong this connection is. And I talk about it, and it's one thing to talk about it, but it's quite another to experience it and really start to make those connections. And that's one reason why I think more conversation, it would benefit to have more conversation around awareness of how we're feeling and how it could impact our gut. And we've seen this too with people like, having urgency and like running to the bathroom. I talked to this with a therapist. One time we had a conversation. We did similar to a podcast. And in that conversation, she was mentioning how, sometimes maybe people are giving too much of themselves away, and maybe that might be expressing in like bells and having to run to the bathroom, or maybe they're bottling things in emotion wise, and maybe that might be expressed through, holding things in like constipation. So it's really quite fascinating how strong this connection is. And we're also seeing emerging research about how the gut microbiome could impact mood. So it's fascinating.
It is, and it seems like we're so sensitive and aware of other things, but we're not responding with, important levels of response when it comes to different feelings in our gut.
Yeah, that it's interesting, that connection between mind and body. And, you think about it in some situations, but not always related to your gastrointestinal system.
Yeah.
Does environment play a role then as well?
Absolutely. And a lot of the times I say, when people are experiencing digestive symptoms and they're kind of like scratching their head, okay, I want to figure this out. One thing to think about is it might not be the food, but it could be how you're approaching your meal. And that might, I think we want to go so quickly to food, and I want to go so quickly to food, obviously, dietitian, right? We want to think about food, but we also want to think about our environment, like you mentioned. So when we sit down to our meal, how are we approaching our meal? Are we relaxed and ready to eat? Because there is such a thing as rest and digest mode. And if you are not in this rest and digest, blood actually gets shifted away from the digestive system. So if you're approaching your meal where you're very stressed or thinking about your 1,000 things on your to-do list, or you're eating very quickly, which we know can take in a lot of air. So maybe you're not even stressed. Maybe you're just eating very fast because you're like, I got 10 minutes and I need to, run to the next thing. And then you're like, why am I feeling bloated? Or why am I getting a lot of like burps or something like that? And it could be because you're shoveling the food down and taking in a lot of air at the same time. So really, and again, this is where mindful eating can come into play here. How are we approaching our meal? And are we approaching our meal in a way that best sets up our digestion?
Well, I think sometimes I'm guilty of that, especially midday, just trying to shovel something down and then.
My gut is that you've totally alluded to this, but what are some of the first things that you do to diagnose, the issue?
Mm-hmm. So I'll just put in the disclaimer, right? I'm not a doctor, so I can't diagnose, but as a dietitian, I can look out for some of those red flags to refer them to a doctor to get proper diagnosis with whatever, that might be. So some of those red flags I kind of mentioned at the beginning of like, how are the symptoms feeling? Are they painful? Are they how are they like how often are they happening? Are they happening? And I think one tool that I really like for people to keep and to do that's inexpensive, doesn't cost you a thing, and can be very helpful for both you and your dietitian or doctor is a food journal. And so writing down what you're eating, what time you're eating, and also keeping track of symptoms and stress levels and even sleep can be really helpful because sleep could impact digestion as well. We definitely know sleep impacts mood, right? Getting a little cranky if you haven't slept very well. So I think a food journal can be really helpful information for your doctor with diagnosing and kind of getting a clue of like what avenue they might go down. And the thing is, we forget what we eat. And so a food journal is a really good way to keep track of this and also to help us find patterns, which I think is very helpful, especially when it comes to food, to figure things out. Like, oh, maybe it's because I'm eating the same thing for breakfast all the time that I don't think of it as being a problem food, but maybe it's because I'm always having it. Um, I say breakfast because I feel like a lot of people eat kind of the same things for breakfast usually. And so that's why I really like a food journal to kind of help me dietitian wise kind of root down into what's going on.
I like that. And I like the point that you're saying, you can help them. You're not diagnosing, but you can help them, lead them in the right direction. In the meantime, they can
Yes.
connect with a doctor.
And as you're
Yeah.
going through this, it's becoming clearer and clearer how much your thoughts are interfering with potentially a healthy digestive system. But
Yeah.
I can see like doing a food log and finding out, where you're having those problems during certain times of day could really help you to pinpoint it. And once you discover some of the things that might be a problem, what would you say would be the most important first step?
So, like if they start to notice digestive symptom issues popping up, what do you think would be the first step? Yeah, so I think, and I think have kind of what you said at the very beginning, having that conversation with the doctor, bringing it up to them. Sometimes they don't ask you. A lot of the times, I don't, thinking back on my physicals, I don't think a doctor's ever asked me digestive wise how I've been doing. So maybe taking that first step to bring it up. It's your doctor. It shouldn't be taboo to talk about it. I think that is a really good step. Having that food journal, maybe even doing that prior to meeting them, I think can be really helpful for both yourself and for them as they try to go down the route of, finding some type of diagnosis. There's other approaches you can take. You can also kind of start tweaking your diet, or you can start tweaking how you're approaching your meals. Little things like that, like am I chewing my food well enough? Let's cover the basics, right? Like am I chewing well enough? Am I, or straw, for example, am I taking all my drinks out of straws and taking in more air with the straws? Is that what's contributing to the bloating that I'm feeling every time I have lunch? Or how's my stress look like? What does my sleep look like? Am I getting enough fiber, or did I add too much fiber too quickly? Maybe I was getting a little constipated and I added a lot of fiber, and now I, am getting more digestive symptoms, because that can happen when you add fiber too quickly. Your gut needs time to adjust to it. So maybe asking some of those questions can be really helpful. And if you can access a dietitian, uh, highly suggest asking a dietitian so that they can walk you further with that personalization.
Yeah, I know, as you go through this, I was just thinking one of the things as a dietitian, they always teach us to have patients or our clients do is to make sure that they sit down at the table and have a meal and make it a meal, not eating on the run or eating and doing 5 other things. And I could see how that would interfere with digestive health as well.
Right. So you've given us some great tips already. You've helped us with the food journal concept, consulting with a dietitian if you know you have to adjust your diet, all of those important things. And in a sense, you are taking control of your eating habits in many ways, especially if that's one way to manage it. But what about going out to eat and eating with friends?
Yes, that is hard, right? And I think that's why I mentioned quality of life too, because having that social aspect of feeling comfortable going out to eat anywhere with friends, family, by yourself, is important, and really, yeah, really important for your overall health and well-being. So there's some things to take into account. Like now, if you're actively like, things are not well for you, gut wise, and that maybe there's potentially a lot of trigger foods for you, then this might be a time where I would suggest maybe refrain from eating out for a period of time, just till you get things a little bit figured out and calm down. I will say that a lot of people are very intuitive about themselves. And I think this is a little bit like listening to your gut feelings of like, I think maybe this food could potentially be a trigger for me. I found that a lot of people really do have an idea just of like a feeling of what's going on, and have come to certain foods that they know may or may not agree with them. So this is why I love, like, I have like my Yelp app, and like looking at menus ahead of time can be really helpful and also comforting, and feeling more confident when you approach your meal, because then you have a better idea of what foods may or may not work for you based off of the knowledge that you have about how you might react to certain things. Another piece of advice that I like to give when you're eating out, especially, because it's hard, you don't have tons of control over how the meal is prepared, and there's only so much knowledge you can gain from the menu, is if you know there's going to be a dinner out, a special dinner out that you're going to have with friends or family, come into that meal with your best digestion foot forward. And what I mean by that is making sure that you set up the earlier part of your day the best you can. So eating foods that you know agree with you, getting that sleep, really taking that time to eat your meals and chew your meals well, so that when you do come to that dinner, even if you were to eat a food that might upset you later, at least you're starting from more of a solid footing than if you came into that event already with a gut that's a little bit iffy. And then the following day, kind of do what you did earlier the previous day, meaning stick with foods that you know agree with you, take it simple, take it easy, so that if you were to eat something that disagreed with you the night before, you can kind of help your body gut recover a little bit easier.
And just recently, we went over to a friend's home. She was cooking, but another friend was on a diet. So she brought her own meal, and she said, don't worry about me. I'm going to bring, because she's trying to be really careful. Can you do the same thing, obviously, if you're trying to be really careful with what you eat to protect your gut?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Especially if you're coming to a meal with like a food allergy, or maybe you can't have gluten at all for whatever reason. Yeah, absolutely. And I think bringing your own food, you're still able to have that social aspect with your friends and loved ones. But you don't have to eat the same thing they're doing, and that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And she didn't feel like she was being denied or anything. We had just as much fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. No, really good information. And obviously there's a lot of different types of intolerances and allergies and gut health issues. But are there any go-to foods you've found that help to settle the gut and help to equalize things? Are there foods that you go to just to make sure everything you can, have your gut in the best shape possible?
Yeah, actually, the first thing I thought of when you said that question wasn't food, it was actually a drink. And tea is the first thing that came to mind. I'm a huge fan of teas. I think teas can be very supportive for your gut, and it also helps to add in that ritual of like taking the time to prepare yourself a cup of and we can talk about teas, like what might be supportive. But also just like holding that warmth in your hand. You can even put that warmth on your stomach, especially if you have, already experiencing some digestive upset. But I really do like ginger tea, is a favorite of mine to help with an upset stomach. Ginger or peppermint, or even chamomile. And I was just talking about this to somebody else. And chamomile we think of for like, ooh, if I had a particularly stressful day. But again, mind gut, like if we're addressing some of the stress up here, maybe we might also be addressing some of the stress in our stomach. So, and those teas are really easily able to find, but teas or another food or food rather that I think can be really supportive, or soups. Cooking the vegetables and meats just softens everything, especially the fibers, just making it a little bit gentler on our gut, so especially if you're recovering from like a stomach bug, or just, maybe you overindulged the night before, something simple like that can be really nourishing, but at the same time, very calming to the body.
What do you think of yogurt and probiotics?
Yeah. Oh my God. I love yogurt, but I will say I put this on LinkedIn. I initially did not like yogurt when I was younger because I was like, what is this? It was tart. But then the yogurt in the 90s is different from the yogurt now. And now I am proud to say that I have a tub of plain Greek yogurt in the fridge that I use. Actually, right now I have a bunch of flavored yogurts because I got them at Costco. And so they're just like stacks of like strawberry, blueberry. I love yogurt, and it's so versatile in the kitchen. and is a really nice option for another popular digestive complaint, which can be lactose intolerance. Sometimes when people have lactose intolerance, they're under the misconception that that means no dairy, and that's absolutely not true. There's, everyone has a varying tolerance level, and yogurt is a really nice option for people because the probiotics in yogurt aid with better digestibility of it.
Well, this is a good segue because I get to ask the
Yeah.
antibiotics question. Let's imagine we can't avoid taking antibiotics. We know that it kills the good bacteria in our tummy. So what am I going to do to bring that good flora back into my gut?
Yeah, so there is a probiotic supplement that can be helpful for antibiotics. It's Aspelardi, which could be a nice option. But I think this is also too where enjoying kefir or yogurt can be a really nice food option for people. So incorporating a little bit more of that maybe, or being more intentional about having it while you're on the antibiotic and for a little bit while you're off can be really supportive.
So you can take it then when you're on the antibiotic. You don't necessarily have to wait until after you're off
For the
your
Aspelardi?
yeah.
Yeah, so yes, it's actually a yeast-based one, and yes, so it's a little
Okay.
bit different than like a lactobacillus-based
Okay.
probiotic.
Okay.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yeah, and kefir is really increasing in
love kefir.
popularity. It's been big over in Europe and a number of other countries
Yeah.
for years, but it's really been gaining in popularity here in the U.S. That's for sure.
Because I favor tart,
Okay.
savory and
Is your
tart.
favorite tart really?
Yeah, so I go toward that, and the kefir
Mm-hmm.
that I get is very tasty. Yeah,
So we talked a little about prebiotics. What are
Mm-hmm.
postbiotics?
yeah.
And
Postbiotics, to be honest, are a little bit confusing to me, even when I'm talking about it, because I feel like a lot of um, the science is changing around postbiotics.
Mhm.
But postbiotics can be these, and so the whole idea, whether it's a prebiotic or a probiotic, one of the underlying themes between the two and a postbiotic is this idea, or it is the concept that it offers some type of health benefit. It's been demonstrated to offer some type of health benefit. And so postbiotics are no different. It's this uh, compound substance, maybe I'm not quite sure what the right word, or bacterial end products. I'm trying to think of a snazzier word to say that. But there are these compounds that could also be beneficial, but they're not live or like a probiotic would be. So probiotic is a live bacteria and postbiotics are not. And so that is a distinguishing factor between pro and post. I feel like we're going to start hearing more about post, but I think there's still confusion with pre and pro. So adding another P into the mix is going to be interesting.
So Amanda, what would you consider or classify as like the three top steps for us, regardless of whether we have gut issues or not? I'm convicted after this conversation that we need to protect our gut. We need to be sensitive to it. We need to be mindful, and we want it to be healthy. So what are like three top things that you would suggest so that all of us make application of good gut health?
Absolutely, great question. The first one that comes to mind is plant variety. So eating different plants, because it is thought that the more variety of plants we have in our diet, can aid with a more diverse gut microbiome, which is thought to be a sign of good gut health. And plants are fiber foods, and fiber fuels our good gut bacteria. And so I think that is one avenue that is easy for us. And that can look like the next time you go to the grocery store, picking up a new fruit, a new vegetable, a new grain that you haven't tried, or maybe you have tried and you just haven't eaten in a while. I think that's a really practical place for many of us to start, and just start with one. Just start with one. No need to get crazy with it. One is one more than you had the week before, right? So, and you don't want it to turn into a science experiment in the back of your fridge either. And so I think that's why I'm like, don't, just start slow. And I think this is another reason why I love yogurt, is because yogurt pairs well with so many different plants, because smoothies, I think, are an easy way to do this. So maybe, finding an avenue of how can I incorporate more plants. So now if I want to do plants, maybe step two would be, what are some food preparation ways, some cooking types of dishes that I really enjoy. And smoothies are one thing that come to mind because I really love yogurt as a nice source of protein. You get your probiotics in there, or you can get your probiotics in there. Not all yogurts are the same. Um, and it goes really well with a variety of plants like berries or spinach if you want to turn it into a green smoothie, or maybe oh, this is just turning into a love affair about yogurt because I'm like, oh, yogurt goes in my oatmeal because then I just like swirl it and it makes my oatmeal fluffy and I like my
We
oatmeal
love it.
Oh,
fluffy.
yeah, we like love affairs with yogurt. Yeah.
I was so so one would be plans, two would be finding ways that you like, right? Don't force yourself to eat something that you don't enjoy because that ultimately is not going to benefit your gut. Kind of what I mentioned at the beginning is your gut loves consistency, particularly with fiber. And you're not going to be consistent with things you don't like or enjoy. And then I think another area that also ties into yogurt, funny enough, is adding more fermented foods. So maybe
Oh,
that is
okay.
yogurt. Maybe that is kefir. Maybe that is sauerkraut, kimchi, curtido. I don't know. I'm sure I'm blinking out on other fermented foods, but fermented foods I think are really, or I don't think they are really great for your gut. Can have increased digestibility in some cases. In some cases, we've seen increased vitamins and can be a source of live and active cultures. Not all fermented foods will be probiotic, but regardless, they're going to be really uh, great for your gut. And so I think that is another area that we can start working on. And I personally didn't grow up eating a lot of fermented food, so it's something I had to kind of learn to like. And well, I don't know, some foods were easier than others, but learn to explore on my own as an adult, put it that way.
Great advice, Amanda.
I know, it's been fascinating. I know when you were going through that, I thought, okay, you treat your gut like a little child because you just introduce one food at a time and you mix it in with other
Yeah.
foods they already like, and then
Yeah.
your gut's happy and your child's
Yeah.
happy. And but such great information. We really appreciate you being with us here today. Is there anything we missed or anything you want to add?
I'm trying to think of a good thing to add. I will say, just emphasize again. Oh, here's a good piece of advice. When you go and you're like, okay, I want to start adding more plants. I want to have more variety in my life, in my diet to better my gut. What can be really helpful is to go in with a game plan. Maybe the first time you go to the grocery store, you don't pick it up, but you eye it and you're like, okay, I'm like parsnips. I saw parsnips recently. I haven't had parsnips in a really long time. And I've only had them, I think, in like soup or as like a parsnip French fry. So I saw it, and now I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go home and find a recipe that I like for those parsnips, so that when I go back to the store, I can pick them up and I know exactly what I'm gonna do with it because that's the hard part is the follow through, right? I have it in my fridge, I have it in my kitchen, but I don't want it to turn into a science experiment. I want to actually eat this food. I don't want to contribute to food waste or wasting my money. So having a game plan, I think, can be really helpful.
Great information and great advice. We really have enjoyed this today. I can see each question. I could think of about 4 or 5 other things. So I
Oh,
can see
absolutely.
a second part to this. But
Yeah.
listen, thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.